you very much for that, and welcome everybody to today's session, Pearson Edexcel International A-Level Economics, Getting Ready to Teach, and welcome. And this is Module 1. The second module will take place in a few weeks' time. You may already be signed up for that one as well. So thank you very much for completing the poll. There were 3 questions on that. 2 of them you could just enter your response on the poll itself, and we've got quite a mix. The majority of people are new to the delivery of this qualification, but then we've got a small percentage who have been delivering it either for 1 or 2 years or for even longer than that, so familiar possibly with even the legacy. So the majority, of course, being new to it, did not enter students in the previous exams. There were, again, a small number who did, however, and key reasons for attending today's session, well, that's what we have the chat for. So if there's anything you want to share with us, key reasons, you feel free to add it later on, then that's great. You can do that as we go through this session. There was just one question that's come through earlier, which was whether the recording would be shared. The recording should be available about an hour after it's finished, and you would just go onto the same link that you used to enter this session to be able to access that again. Okay, but certainly wait an hour. It's give or take, so that's just how you can access that. So on we go with today's session. Basically what we're looking at, today's agenda over the next 2 hours, we're going to look at gaining an understanding about how the qualifications are devised, understand the content of the qualification, so we'll be going through the specification for that, understanding how to plan the course as well as lessons. There'll be some tips and some advice on how maybe to do that. Of course, you might already be very happy with what you do. It's just further ideas for you. We'll be looking at an understanding of the assessment of the qualification. This is the key thing here. An understanding of assessment on the qualification and how to prepare your students for that. So that's certainly one of the key things that we'll be looking at today. And also looking at the support that's available from Pearson. There's a whole wealth of materials and support available to you. And even if you have questions relating to this session, if you think of them afterwards, then there are ways to make contact with Pearson to get answers on that. And as we go through the session, this isn't something that happens just at the end. Ongoing, we will have the opportunity to network and to discuss ideas with one another for everybody who's in the session, because there are certain times we will pause and there'll be things, and I'll ask you, maybe you want to share your ideas. We're using chat today rather than just in the Q&A session box, so everybody can see what you're asking, because it's usually beneficial to everybody, so it's better, and we don't have things all over the place. So we're just focusing on using the meeting chat, so you can type in there any questions as we go through, and we have the wonderful event moderator Antoinette's with us at the moment. She's answering your questions already to help with this session. So welcome to Pearson. So Pearson Edexcel is the world's leading learning company, and our mission is to help people make progress in their lives through learning, because we believe that learning opens up opportunities, creating fulfilling careers and better lives. Our qualifications and assessments help to educate millions of people worldwide, and we provide that support I mentioned through innovative textbooks, curriculum materials, multimedia learning tools, IT platforms, and professional development. The impact of what we do, well, right at the core of everything is our desire to make a measurable impact on improving people's lives through learning. Pearson Edexcel is part of Pearson, and it's the UK's largest awarding body. So we're moving on initially to look at the specification and an overview of the content of the specification. Now, if you go onto the Pearson Edexcel website, and you can specifically look at international A levels and economics, and you will find the specification and the sample assessment materials. The sample assessment materials, I believe, are also available in the resources that is being shared with you in this event, as is a copy of the slides, so you can have a look at those as well afterwards. But the SAMS is also available on the website, and the specification is there as well. And there are many, many, many other materials available on the website as well, such as past papers and mark schemes, exemplars of how marking has taken place on certain questions, on certain responses. So you can see how the senior team apply their marking and apply the mark scheme to different responses. So you can see top quality answers, as well as responses where students have maybe done something, made errors, and some of those common errors that you can see where they've gone wrong. And of course, then utilize that to help your students not do the same thing. We'll talk more about that in due course, but as for now, as I say, the specification, so this is what we're focusing on initially. This is the main document that you need to teach the course. It outlines the aims of the course and the content that you must cover and all the information you need about assessing your students. The sample assessment materials, that is another document that is vitally important. That gives you examples of question papers and mark schemes. It goes through all 4 units, and it shows the question types and how they will be marked by examiners, how the mark scheme is applied. And we base all future papers, so we have been doing since the qualification began, and we will continue to do so. All future papers and assessments are based on those sample assessment materials. So start at Unit 1, Markets in Action, and we're just going to have an overview now, looking at the content of the first unit of the qualification. So this section, it's on the nature of economics, and it's new compared to what we had on the legacy specification. It includes the role of financial markets, and that's included on specialisation. There's reference in this section to Adam Smith and to Karl Marx, and that's in the part on the free markets and command economies section. The next part of Markets in Action, we have consumer behaviour and demand. So students here would be encouraged to take a critical view of assumptions underlying the market economy. It also looks at the demand curve, price, income and cross elasticities of demand, and the supply curve and price elasticity of supply. Next, we have price determination. So this here, we have an emphasis really to take place on that students need to understand the impact of a specific tax and an ad valorem tax on the supply curve. So these are some of the key areas you can see there on the slide, and these you will see repeated as you look at the specification. The 4th section in Unit 1, so here we have market failure section. This now includes moral hazard and speculation and market bubbles. You can see those are the last 2 points under the market failure heading. So those are things I'm just drawing your attention to. I know the majority of you are new to teaching this spec anyway, so you might not be familiar with what was on the legacy, but these are relatively new in comparison, but they are of equal importance on the current International A-level economics specification. Unit 2, as we move on to this, I know this is just it's a quick overview. This is all the detail that's in the specification. It's just really to highlight some of the elements so we can spend more time as we move on looking at the assessment. But Unit 2 is macroeconomic performance and policy. So here, looking at this overview, measures of economic performance, you will see economic growth, inflation, employment and unemployment, and balance of payments. Please note that national happiness and well-being are included in the section on economic growth. And then as we move on, we have aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Please note the savings ratio is included in the section on consumption. So under aggregate demand, the second bullet point there, consumption, the savings ratio is included in that part of the specification. The third part of Unit 2. So here we have the multiplier, and that is including alternative methods of the calculation. So as it says there, including different ways to calculate the multiplier. Now, there is now reference to foreign direct investment, FDI, and productivity in the section on economic growth. So the second main subheading there, economic growth, as I say, that has reference to FDI and productivity as well. And then the last overview on Unit 2, the last topic area, macroeconomic objectives and policies. And so this section, this includes the role of central banks in the conduct of monetary policies. So just things to be aware of there, as well as you can see, we have on the slide the list of the main topic areas within Unit 2, Section 4, macroeconomic objectives and policies. So we're just going to pause here, and a brief activity for you. Out of those things that we've looked at, and you may want to sort of pull up your specification. You've hopefully got a copy of that already anyway. If you have a look at that, is there anything that sticks out you think might be the most challenging to teach? Maybe you've already been teaching it, trying to teach it. Are there some areas that you think are a little bit more challenging than others? And if so, please share those thoughts with us in the text chat, the meeting chat. Thank you. I'm just going to go quiet for a minute and just give you opportunity to do that. Thank you very much, everyone. That's really great that you're participating with all that, and you'll see, and hopefully you can get a little bit of reassurance from this. There's a lot of the topic areas that you're putting through. You can see that there's a number of other of your colleagues, your fellow delegates, putting the same thing. The multiplier effect seems to be the top one coming through in all this, but there's certainly quite a few there. There are many ideas about teaching topics, things like the Pearson Edexcel Facebook group, so teachers can share ideas on teaching strategies. That's certainly worth having a look at if you aren't already a member of that page if you're able to do that. That is certainly the sort of the number one thing I would recommend, but also making sure you get updates from our subject advisor, Colin Leith. I'll be talking about him in due course. It's a good way to get access to networking basically and other ideas across the board. So thank you very much for sharing those. We'll have a look at the next 2 units now, and we'll do something similar with that. And just looking at things that are off the topic areas, yeah, looking at the marking on the papers, yeah, being familiar with the criteria, that's what we're moving on to after we go through the specification. So brilliant, thank you very much for that. And on we go then to look at Unit 3, Business Behaviour, a content overview of this. So types and sizes of business and revenue, costs and profits are the main areas in part 1 of Unit 3. So we've got joint ventures and state-owned enterprises are included in the section types of businesses. However, transnational companies, which previously were in this section, they're now in Unit 4. So that's important to note, particularly if you've just have students who are entered in the AS qualification. Very important to know they're in Unit 4 now. Second part of Unit 3, business behaviour. We're looking at market structures and contestability. So in oligopoly, there is a need to teach the simple game theory to explain interdependence between firms. There's no reference, however, to the kinked demand curve or analysis of that. That is not in the specification, but the simple game theory is needed. Natural monopoly is included in the section on monopoly. Moving on, part 3, labour markets. Well, labour markets are new to this unit. They previously were in Unit 1, so these are now in Unit 3. Again, this is really important if you've got students who are only studying AS, so that now they don't need to be looking at that. While marginal revenue productivity, MRP theory, is not in this specification. However, if it's used by students to explain the demand for labour, that's absolutely fine. It can still be credited. Just know that anything that is not in the specification will not be directly tested on any exam paper. And then on to Unit 4. And please note here that the section on characteristics of globalisation, this includes foreign direct investment. So that's a link to what we had before. So in Unit 4, developments in the global economy, this first part does include foreign direct investment. And the second part, note that there's a new section on international competitiveness, and that is transferred from Unit 3, and it's in more depth than it was in the legacy specification. So just to be aware, that is now in Unit 4. The third part, the role of the state in the macroeconomy and growth and development in developing, emerging and developed economies. So the distinction between automatic stabilisers and discretionary fiscal policies included in the developing economy section. Note that the HDI has been moved from Unit 2 to this unit. And the Harrod-Domel model and Singer hypothesis are included in sections on constraints on growth and development. Buffer stock schemes and the Lewis model are included in the section on measures to promote growth and development. And so once again, we just have a quick think about Units 3 and 4 in particular. See if there's a common topic area where you think they would be most challenging to teach. And I'll just pause and just review questions again while you have a think about any of the sections there that may be more tricky than others. Okay, thank you once again, everybody. And you'll see again, there's a couple of topic areas that are common that are coming through there. So labour markets and game theory certainly seeming to be least favourites in terms of where it might be the most challenging. So yeah, again, sharing ideas is always a good idea. See how some of your colleagues do this and having a chat maybe on some of the groups and sharing those ideas across those is definitely recommended. There was a question about when the legacy ended, so we changed specification and where to access past papers. Well, when you go onto the website, so that if you go onto Pearson Edexcel website, and you will see on that the all the past papers from this qualification, so that the legacy is not included in the same place as the current spec and the legacy. They're in different places. I'm not actually sure if the legacy past papers are still available, but certainly every past paper from the current specification is on that, and you won't be getting mixed up with the examining style and the assessment style, because they are, as I say, only the current specification is on there for you. So this was 2018 started teaching, so we've got an awful lot of past papers on the website now from that, including the sample assessment materials as well. You can have a look at those and get information from those as well about the assessment and sample questions, and indeed we're going to look at some shortly too. So some of the things that examiners have noticed since the specification began, some of the areas where candidates are maybe slipping up. So some of the issues that have perhaps caused issues in Unit 1 specifically, and you can see these main things on the slide here. So candidates do need to pay attention to producer surplus and consumer surplus, as many have identified them and got them the wrong way round. So that's something to remind your students, that they're checking and they're reading questions very carefully and understanding the difference. Candidates need to know how to define free goods and economic goods. Sometimes these have been confused, and these have offered definitions of public goods. Candidates need to understand how price elasticity of demand varies along a demand curve. So going into a bit more depth on the understanding of the demand curve. And candidates generally understood that an indirect cost leads to a leftward shift of the supply curve. However, they need to understand that an ad valorem tax would cause the supply curve to pivot and not shift parallel to the original curve. So these are some of the key things that they need to be aware of. Further points. So still some confusion between market failure and government failure. And of course, if you've got a question on one or the other, and you then write a response that is talking about what the question is not asking, it's not going to lead to any marks. So it is vital that candidates understand the difference and they read the question. We do unfortunately see some brilliant answers, but to the wrong question. And of course, if it's 0 marks out of 20, if it's an essay question, that's a huge impact on results. So please encourage your students to thoroughly check that they know what they're responding to. On externalities diagrams, it's very important that candidates can accurately identify the welfare gain or welfare loss. And when identifying external costs, it's very important here that that third parties are identified, explain who they are and how they can be affected by the various factors. So these are just some of the points that have been flagged up as examiners have been marking papers so far on this specification. For Unit 2, some key things to look out for. So here we have knowing the difference between a fiscal deficit and a current account deficit. So again, if a candidate responds to the wrong thing and they come up with an answer to a current account deficit, but the question was referring to a fiscal deficit, again, it's going to mean no marks because it's not answering the correct question. So it's really, really important that they do read the question and they understand the difference. Students need to know the difference between deflation and disinflation. Candidates, it's been seen sometimes, don't know a definition of savings ratio. So just some, I mean, definitions, certainly something to go through. Those are maybe sort of every lesson you could go through 5 or 10, make it a bit of a homework exercise, make it a bit of a game sometimes even, but it's something that it's very useful for candidates to make sure they're learning those definitions to aid their performance in the exams. And a number of candidates couldn't calculate the multiplier. And as we saw with your chat, that the multiplier is certainly one of the issues, one of the areas that causes most issues for teaching. So that's sort of in tune with what examiners have been seeing, that the candidates are struggling to calculate the multiplier and to apply that in context. So to calculate the overall change in national income. Yeah, so the knowing the difference between the pivotal shift or a parallel shift, that's something that candidates do need to know as well. Thanks for that question there, Zabe. Examiners have also been noticing generally, so this isn't just about specific units. So here we've got a diagram in section B. It's a short answer question. It's worth 4 marks in section B. On units 1 and 2, there are 5 4-mark questions. And when it asks the candidate to draw a diagram, they only need to draw the diagram and label it. They do not need a written explanation for the diagram. If it's just a 4-mark question with the command word draw, okay, it only needs the diagram with the labels. So the key thing there is so you candidates aren't wasting time writing that explanation. They just need to draw the diagram. In diagrams, encourage your students to identify both the old and the new equilibrium points and to show the changes using arrows to identify a shift in a curve, for example, and the new price and the new quantity. So get them familiar with drawing the original, so the old equilibrium points, get them down, and then, okay, what's the situation? What's what's actually occurring? And how is that going to affect the diagram? And then they can put the new equilibrium points with the various shifts on after that. But it all should be labelled. That's really important. And when asked to refer to 2 sources, there will be marks available for making explicit reference to information from each source in points-based questions. And we'll look at the difference between points-based questions and levels-based questions as we go through this session. But the key thing with points-based questions, then if it says 2 sources, then there will be marks for 2 sources. So it's really important that that instruction is taken note of. Okay, moving on, and centres should practice reading data style questions. So having some sort of an extract, maybe from a news article, to help candidates understand the difference between commenting on data and commenting on a trend. So just a narrative about what's happening. Are we talking specifically about certain dates, about certain factors that are occurring, or are we talking about a trend that's occurring? It's a gradual increase, overall, is there a decrease, etc., etc. But practicing, and not just for the data and the trends, but also to be more familiar with using the extracts to answer questions. So not just copying a section of an extract, to actually use it for answering the questions. So those are some of the key things that we are looking at so far. Other things that have been noticed, well, diagrams, when they are drawn, they certainly can be very helpful. A question might not specifically ask for a diagram, but if it's something that's going to be useful in answering the question, then absolutely it can be utilised. Reference should be made to that in any sort of essay answer. Then refer to the diagram and explain why it's been put in there. Don't just put a diagram in. Tell your students it's really important to make reference to it so the examiner can see why it's there and how it's actually helping answer the question. Many candidates, they can look at too many reasons, too many factors. So they lose the depth of the response. So it's not a list we're looking for. We're looking for chains of reasoning. So these are really important when we're going through some of the essay questions. I'm not ignoring the questions that are coming through. A lot of what you're putting in there is what we're going through in the slides anyway. So that will be answered in due course. Anything that isn't likely to be answered, I will come back to when we're having a look at you're going through some responses yourself. So sometimes candidates do the best when they're applying specific questions using relevant examples. That if it's asking for something to be in context, the application, it's really important that it's not just a generic textbook answer to actually apply the response. That's really, really important. Evaluation points should be made and linked to the context of the question. So a clear chain of reasoning or sufficient development to be able to achieve the top level for evaluation. Level 3 is the top evaluation level. And to achieve level 3 for evaluation in an essay, it's necessary to include an informed judgment. And I know we've got a question about that. It's very difficult to give you an example without specific questions, and it all depends on what's been written in the essay. But basically, the judgment isn't just repeating something that's already come from what's been said already. It's making a decision, and typically there's not a right or wrong answer because we'll have looked. Ideally, the candidate will have looked at the positives and negatives or one aspect and followed that through with chains of reasoning in the analysis, and they will have argued with that and put up some relative points for the alternative viewpoints, but then they make a decision. Do they think that one side is more effective, more likely, or more rational than the other, and why that is the case? That is where the informed judgment would come in. So we'll move on to look at some of the teaching, and as I say, this is where we'll cover a lot of the questions that you're asking anyway. So looking at the teaching side of things, won't spend too long on this, and we'll get on to the assessment. So the writer of this material thought it might be useful just to share some different learning spaces with you. You might recognise some of this from your own teaching in your own classrooms, but just to throw out there the idea that maybe some topics you might want to rearrange the classroom because they might be more beneficial in different capacities. How do you make sure you cover all the content? This is really important. We do sometimes have topic areas from the specification where a question is asked on that, and you can see that a number of candidates do not know what that is. So every aspect of the specification should be covered because there could be a question on anything on the specification. Use your lesson plans, use your schemes of work. There are examples on the Pearson Edexcel website as well. There are editable schemes of work to help you work through and adjust to your own environment, your own needs. So whether you have more than one teacher of a group, the number of lessons you have in a week, say, how your actual topics are split down over the course of the study. So those can be edited even to work for your particular centre. So just some ideas there about how to cover all of the content. Another activity for you here then on the schemes of work. Have a think about considerations to take into account when planning a scheme of work. So what are the sort of things that you would put down on that, just to give you a chance to have a think and share ideas with the rest of the delegates in the room today. Thank you once again, everyone. I really like some of the comments that you're putting through there. It made me smile. Certainly very familiar with some of those points, particularly things like you don't have as much time in year 2 as year 1. That is very true. Very worth remembering. Yeah, the level of English that your students have is really important because, of course, that can massively impact how long it can take to teach a topic. Certainly key things here. And so pacing and the time and practice questions, really good points coming through here, all really helpful. I hope you're all sort of having a look at those and nodding because you're familiar with that, or ideally gaining some ideas as well and things to think about for your own schemes of work as you continue through the specification. So we're moving on now, looking at considerations in mapping of the scheme of work. So these are some of the things to add to your list. I mean, things like ability of students, of course, that's what you're saying here. Number of teachers delivering the course. So just a couple more ideas really for you, as well as all the many things that you've put through for us, which is fantastic. Thank you for contributing. We do some of these sessions and everybody's very quiet. So it's great that you're all nice and chatty with us today. Okay. So lesson planning, an example from a scheme of work. So this is section 1, unit 1.3.1, introductory concepts, free market economies, mixed economy and command economy. And we've got A, B and C there. With different aspects. Students could be put into groups to work on a poster display, some allocated free market economies and some allocated command economies, and give them a sheet to clarify the sorts of things that need to be included. Students could then present a poster to the class. A summary sheet could be provided as well of some of those key points after the presentation. So it's just, this might be how you want to sort of lay out how you're going to prepare topics, especially for some of those tricky areas that you were discussing before. So just again, some suggestions for you. And an idea to introduce a lesson on price determination or economic growth. So you could ask your students to work in pairs or in groups to maybe go away and have a go at doing this. So this is section 134 of the specification. It's page 18 for price determination, page 28 for economic growth. That's unit 2.3.5. So maybe you have some of the class doing one, some doing another, and see if they can come up with a sort of question, a 20-mark essay question, for example, that would include or cover one of those topic areas. Give them the mark scheme, give them sample assessment materials, get them to think about it, to try and really focus in on how topics could be examined. So it's just suggestions about how to get that link together between the specification and the assessment and how it actually comes through in the exams. So I know this is the key thing people are wanting to look at. So moving on to this, how is the content assessed? So we'll start with the simple 1-mark multiple choice. So this is an example multiple choice question. There are 2 statements and the question, which one of the following best describes the 2 statements above? There are 4 options, only 1 mark, just one of those to get the multiple choice question mark. So this is just taken from the question paper. And of course, we can move on and see this from the specification. So unit 1, 1.3.1, introductory concepts, positive and normative economics. So this is how it's laid out in the specification. And that was just an example of how a 1-mark question could test this this type of topic area. Of course, it doesn't have to be in a 1-mark multiple choice. It could be a 20-mark essay. So all topic areas need to be learnt by students equally. They need to go through everything in that specification. You need to work with them on that because it could be a multiple choice question like that, or it could be any of the other types of question we have on the paper. So here we're looking at the multiplier. So this is from Unit 2, so 2.3.4, the section on national income. So here is the actual specification insert. So that's the detail. When you look at the spec in Unit 2, you would see this. And then an example of a question. This is a 4-mark question. So this is, it's from Unit 2, of course, because it's from Unit 2, part of the spec. Section B, those 4-mark questions I briefly referred to before. Then we were talking about a draw question. You might have a calculate question. You can see the question here. Ceteris paribus, calculate the final increase in the national income resulting from 11.9 billion Egyptian dollar investment. It does spell out in the stem at the top that LE is the Egyptian currency, and there's a little bit of data there for the students to use, and indeed the figures that they would use to do this calculation. So calculate is the key word. You will see in the specification, page 68 towards the end, there's an appendix there that has the command words for all the questions on the paper. So draw, mentioned before, is one of them. Calculate, that we have as an example on the screen here, is one of those questions. So there is, in all calculate questions in the AS unit, so in section B of units 1 and 2, the calculate questions, they're always out of 4 marks. And the assessment objective breakdown, which we'll look at in more detail shortly, there is 1 mark for knowledge. So, for example, a formula, and 3 marks for application. So that's actually using the data correctly, applying it correctly to the formula to arrive at the correct answer. So that is always the makeup for these 4-mark calculate questions. And that you can see if you look at the sample assessment materials and section B of units 1 and 2, any calculate question, and look at the mark scheme, you will always see assessment objective 1, 1 mark, assessment objective 2, which is application, 3 marks. And as I say, we'll look at that in a little bit more detail shortly. And I just say again, questions coming through we'll look at as we're going through the slides, particularly when it comes on to how to structure responses in essays. So we will be covering that, don't worry. Moving on. So how is the content assessed an activity for you? Just to have a think about. Of course, we don't have time to dwell too long on all this, but something to think about. To devise a 20-mark essay question to match the content for Unit 2. And the topic area 2.3.6, macroeconomic objectives and policies. So just have a think. If you want to put some ideas into the chat, then that would be great to share. But how perhaps, or what sort of question might you ask? Remember that we're going to need for a 20-mark essay question, we're going to need a certain command word. I'm not going to tell you what it is right now. See if you've looked at the sample assessment materials. Maybe you've identified it for Unit 2. What would the command word be? And you would use that to ask any sort of question that you think might be appropriate to test macroeconomic objectives and or policies. So the actual question, so the command word, and how would you use that in a question? So just have a think about it, and I'll come back to you in just a minute or so. Fantastic. We've got some really good ideas coming through here. And yep, absolutely. Evaluate is indeed the command word, but it's the question using that we're particularly interested in. So fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing these. I have to pass this on to the senior team who write the papers. But yeah, we've got some really good ideas. Looking at evaluate 2 macroeconomic conflicts with economic growth. What have we got before that? We've got evaluate the impact of imposing a demand side policy on, and depends on the data, the STEM put forward. Evaluate the extent to which policies to achieve economic growth will conflict with other macroeconomic objectives. Plenty of thought there for a two-sided argument with informed judgment. Absolutely, thank you. And Liam, you've even given us the STEM there. Fantastic. Yeah, evaluate whether or not economic growth can continue if Indonesian government wants to reduce these environmental problems. Fantastic. Thank you very much for those. You will see, if you go through the past papers on the website, you will see a whole load of other possibilities for different topic areas as well. And they, of course, are mapped to the specification. You can see that by looking at another area on the specification as well. So you can see what each question has been mapped to from the specification. That's always done for every paper at the end of every series. So we're going to focus a little bit on the AS, so units 1 and 2, and just look at the assessment of these 2 units in particular. They do mirror one another in terms of the format that they have and the time allowed, the number of marks, etc. So unit 1, markets in action, unit 2, macroeconomic performance and policy. The time for each paper is 1 3/4 hours, so 105 minutes, and that's the same for both units 1 and 2. And then each of these units is broken down into 4 sections. We have talked a little bit about section B already, but we're going to put that in the broader context. So units 1 and units 2 look like this. Every exam paper for unit 1 and unit 2 is made up in this format. So section A is out of 6 marks, and there are 6 multiple choice questions, each of course worth 1 mark. So that is always section A, and we had an example a few slides ago when we were looking at the statements. So that's hopefully reasonably self-explanatory, but of course 6 marks can make a big difference between a grade, and so it's still really important, and those topic areas can be in any of the sections, so really important that students are covering the whole specification. So section B that we looked at in a bit more detail, there are 5 4-mark questions in section B, so they can have command words such as draw or calculate that we looked at, but they can also have the command words, other command words that you will see in the sample assessment material, such as explain. So that's a 4-mark question as well. And there are 2 different types of explain question, which you will see in more detail on page 68 of the specification. The key thing to know about that is they have a different breakdown in the assessment objectives. As I keep promising, we will look at assessment objectives in more detail. So for now, just be aware that there's always a command word with every question from section B onwards, and they will always have the same number of marks in that section. So section B, 5 of them, each worth 4 marks, giving us a total of 20. Section C, the majority of these questions are still points-based. Everything's been points-based so far. So all of section C remains points-based except for the 14-mark question. That's a levels-based question, which I will talk about in more detail shortly. So the 5 questions that are there, the 2, 4, 6 and 8-mark questions are points-based questions. They have a specific assessment objective breakdown where the examiner is looking for a specific number of knowledge, application and analysis points, and on the 8-mark question only looking for evaluation as well. So that, again, we'll look at individual examples. There's a lot more detail of these in module 2, but we're looking at the overall breakdown of these at the moment. So the 5 parts to a data response question would give us a total of 34 marks. And then the fourth section, section D, this is worth 20 marks and it's one essay question. There are 2 options, however, so the candidate can choose one of 2 essays to write about, and that essay will allow them to access up to 20 marks. So the 14-mark question in section C and the 20-mark question in section D are levels-based questions. They are not marked out of an individual number of points for knowledge, application, analysis and evaluation. They have all those skills within them, but they need the examiners use a level descriptor table to place the response in the most appropriate level, and the mark is then decided upon within that level. Again, more detail as we get through to that section, but that's the overall makeup of units 1 and 2. When it comes to units 3 and 4, so A-level students will study these as well as units 1 and 2. AS students will just be studying units 1 and 2. But units 3 and 4, they mirror one another as well, but these differ from units 1 and 2. So unit 3 is business behaviour, unit 4, developments in the global economy. These papers are slightly longer, that's 2 hours for each of them. And as I say again, they are broken down into the same types of section as one another every series, but these differ from units 1 and 2. So this time there are 3 sections, not 4, A, B and C. Section A is the same makeup as units 1 and 2. This time, 6 multiple choice questions, 6 marks. So again, 1 mark per question on multiple choice. Section B is similar to section C of units 1 and 2. It's got 5 parts to it, 5 questions each with those 2, 4, 6, 8 or 14 marks, giving us a total of 34 marks. And that's always going to be the case. And as with units 1 and 2, 2, 4, 6 and 8 mark questions are points based, with the 2, 4 and 6 not including evaluation. Only the 8 mark includes evaluation as well, but it's still a points based question. And the 14 mark question is a levels based question, again including evaluation as well. Now, section C is worth half of the paper. So at the 80 marks on the paper, section 3 is 50% of that with 40 marks. And that's because this time we require 2 essays. Each essay is worth 20 marks, and there is a choice of 3 essays. So 3 options, only 2 to be written, only, I say. Obviously, this is a considerable amount. 2 essays out of that choice of 3 to arrive at a total of 40 marks. Okay, so that is the overall breakdown of those assessment units. Zabe, you're just saying knowledge application analysis, 12 marks, the breakdown, knowledge for, no. The levels-based questions we will look at in more detail. The marks are not worked out individually on those skills in levels-based questions. It is only in the points-based questions, that's 8 marks and below, that we have a specific breakdown. Levels-based questions for 14 and 20 marks, it's all about the descriptor table, the level descriptor table. It is not a specific breakdown of the marks. It's really important to get to grips with that. Now, assessment objectives, these are key things. This is how all papers are assessed, and this is what examiners have to follow when they're writing papers to make sure that these skills can be accessed through the questions, and this is how they are absolutely always marked. So this is really, really key. You can see here on the screen, this is in the specification as well, just to give you that extra detail if you want to look at it a bit longer than the time we have with us today. So assessment objective AO 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's a little bit more detail about what those mean on the screen now. Broadly speaking, assessment objective 1 is knowledge and understanding. 2 is application, 3 is analysis, and 4 is evaluation, broadly speaking. And you will see that the breakdown, the percentage of those is higher for assessment objective 1, the knowledge, in the AS units than it is in the A-level units, okay? And that's because evaluation particularly increases as you get into the A-level units. You can see there's a big difference there, 27.5% of knowledge in the AS units, only 18.75 in the A2 units. Compared with evaluation, that goes the other way, 20% in AS units and 30% in units 3 and 4. And the overall qualification. So, and then overall the whole A level, it's broadly speaking, it's a quarter each, but there is application is something to really pay attention of here. It's more than quarter of the skills are coming through from application. So when a student writes an answer that they've got a brilliant memory and they remember the textbook, they're not applying necessarily to the extracts or to information that's needed to answer the question, because the question, when it's requiring application, will refer to a specific context. And if that context isn't used in the answer, then the student will not be attaining the AO2 marks, or if it's a levels-based question, they will not be meeting the descriptor for that particular aspect. And so they're likely to be falling down there and not gaining the marks that they would if they were applying it. So application is vitally important. So just to not lose sight of that. So as I say, that's in the specification if you'd like to look at that in a little more detail, but we'll be referring to that as we go through the other slides as well, and utilising that as we look at the mark schemes, which we're moving on to do now. And the points-based mark scheme, which we can see as we've talked about already. So 2, 4, and 6 and 8 mark questions are all points based. The 1 mark multiple choice as well, of course, but that's just the 1 mark. You don't really need to worry too much about the assessment objectives in detail on those. So as I say, 8 marks or below, all points based, and the mark scheme will actually show that in terms of the assessment objectives being tested. There is a specific number of marks allocated to each assessment objective that is tested on these points-based mark schemes. Therefore, to access those marks, the candidate needs to understand which assessment objective is actually being tested. So, for example, if a question is asking for one reason of something, if it's only asking for one reason that will give you the knowledge mark, and the candidate gives us 3 reasons, they might all be accurate reasons, but there is only, for example, 1 mark for the knowledge. They cannot pick up other marks, even though they've given us other accurate reasons, because that is not allowed by the assessment objectives. It depends on the question, but that will be either application or analysis, or in the 8 mark questions, it will be evaluation. So it's specific that the assessment objectives need to be adhered to in order to actually pick up those marks. So in the case of application, where application is needed, then those will be specific marks for relating it to the data or to an extract. And again, so we'll talk about the levels questions in more detail as we get to that part of the presentation. So an example of a points-based mark scheme for a 4-mark question. So you have here the question itself. New Zealand has a population of 4,693 million people. In 2017, its net migration was 73,000, with more individuals arriving than leaving the country. Explain, that's your command word, explain one possible impact on the level of unemployment of this net migration. So, explain questions. And I did say there are 2 types. This particular type is asking for an impact. So if it's an explain question where it's looking for an impact, then it's we need a simple chain of reasoning, and that's why there's 2 marks for analysis. So 1 mark for knowledge, for giving us an impact. It says 1 possible impact. So here, as long as there's 1 correct impact, that will pick up the knowledge mark. Giving us 4 correct impacts, we'll still only get 1 knowledge mark, because there is only 1 knowledge mark available. Knowledge 1. Okay, that's shown in the mark scheme. To get the other 3 marks, we need application, so linking it to that STEM. There's plenty of information in that STEM, and you can see the example from the mark scheme at the bottom. There are 3 possible marks there, options for the application mark coming through. Any one of those would pick up the application mark, but there's only 1 mark available for application. So putting all 3 of those points that are in the mark scheme would still only access 1 application mark. And then the other 2 marks for analysis. So you'll see here that these are linked together. Unemployment may rise for 1 mark as the working population in the country is increasing for the other mark. That's one possible way of analysing the impact that is being stated and hopefully applied. They are standalone, so if there's no application, then the student can still pick up 3 marks for 1 impact, which is your knowledge, and analysing it with the simple linked strand. So it's just 2 aspects linked together for the analysis. Equally, they could pick up just 1 mark of analysis if they don't fully link it together, but they partially do that. And they can pick up application without analysis if they've linked the data to the impact they've given us. They can pick up the 2 marks. They are standalone. However, they do, of course, need an accurate impact. If there's no impact given, you can't analyse, you can't apply something when we don't have the impact in the first place. Okay, but that is how those are broken down. And I refer again to page 68 in the specification. It's appendix 6, and you will see the command words. So explain in this case, and it says the number of marks, 4 marks. And there are 2 types of explain question. This one is the second one. It says when asking students to explain, as is in the command word, a reason or impact, which you can see here in the question. This also includes analysis, as it requires a 2-stage chain of reasoning. So if it's explain a reason or explain an impact, it has 2 marks for analysis. This is the main thing I would say to take from understanding of the assessment objectives, because the other type of explain question does not include analysis. That has 2 marks for knowledge and 2 marks for application. And that's when asking students to explain a term or characteristics. That requires knowledge and the application. So you will see the breakdown of these in the mark schemes, and you will see knowledge, application, analysis, or just knowledge and application, and look at the explain question that goes with that. And that's certainly an exercise I would work with my students to understand the difference between them, because that's key to knowing whether you're putting that link chain or whether you're focusing more on the knowledge and the application. Okay, so yeah, that's exactly as I'm saying, Josie. The 2 factors, price elasticity, demand in this example, they're given right in 2 factors of knowledge and another mark scheme definition of the concept. So it depends on the question, but that would be more of an explanation. That will be the explain question where you've got the knowledge and the application marks. Right, it's not asking for an impact. It's not asking there, as I say, for the 2-stage of reasoning. Looking for the reason or the impact. So that's where that will differ. And there are different ways to answer the question. The mark scheme is just giving some of the most likely scenarios or ways to answer it. But as you suggested there, Josie, you could have different ways of approaching it as well. There's not necessarily one right, one wrong. It's the key thing is understanding the assessment objectives. Now, in the levels-based mark schemes, and so this is where we're moving on specifically to look at either the 14 mark or the 20 mark questions, these are where we have the levels-based mark schemes, and this is very different to those we've been looking at in the points-based. So here we will have two level descriptor tables. Evaluation has its own descriptor table that is marked separately from knowledge, application and analysis. Okay, so the 14-mark question will have one table for knowledge, application and analysis and one table for evaluation. Those descriptors are not the same as the 20-mark questions because, of course, there's more depth in the evaluation questions. However, the 20-mark questions will again have two descriptor tables. You will have the knowledge, application and analysis in one table and evaluation in another table. So to score high marks, the candidate needs to meet the criteria for the highest level of knowledge, application and analysis and for evaluation. So the next two slides will show the highest levels for each of these two aspects for a 20-mark essay question. So knowledge, application and analysis, level 4. So there are 4 levels. Thank you for conferring that you can still hear Patrick. Just need to double check your sound maybe, Josie. Thank you. So the 20-mark essay question, up to 12 marks are available for knowledge, application and analysis. So the top level, level 4, has a band of marks between 10 and 12 marks. And the descriptors within level 4, that top level for knowledge, application and analysis, the response demonstrates accurate and precise knowledge and understanding of economics terms, principles, concepts, theories and models, the ability to link knowledge and understanding in context using appropriate examples which are fully integrated to address the broad elements of the question. An analysis is clear, coherent, relevant and focused. The answer demonstrates logical and multi-stage chains of reasoning in terms of cause and or consequence. So you will see that the first bullet point does indeed link to AO1, the second one to AO2 and the third one to AO3. However, nowhere in that descriptor does it put specific number of marks with any of the particular descriptors and assessment objectives. So it is not a case of a certain number of marks for AO1, 2 or 3. The whole of that descriptor, the descriptors all combined together, and holistically we are looking to see what the response, whether it is an accurate fit to this top level, looking at all 3 of those descriptors. Okay, so we are not pinpointing a number of marks to a specific assessment objective. There are up to 12 marks for combined knowledge, application and analysis. To achieve the top level, level 4, for these 3 skills, the response will have a match to these 3 descriptors. If it partially does some and does others or one other very well, it probably won't get the full 12 marks. We would go in at the midpoint and we might stay there if it's a reasonable match or a good match to some and maybe not the other, but we would drop down if it's only just a match to each of these, or if it's quite weak on one aspect but stronger on the others, we might drop down to 10, but it can still access that level even if one of the areas is weaker than the others. If it's all done very well, it would move up in the level, it would get the full 12 marks because the response would be a good match to each of these descriptors in that level. So that is the broad way of looking at the descriptor table for the key thing, of course, the 20-mark essay. This is where most of the marks are coming from, of course, especially in units 3 and unit 4. So key thing to think about, yeah, we're testing knowledge, application and analysis, but there are not certain number of marks individually for those skills. They are combined within the level descriptors. So hopefully that answers questions that we've had a few of earlier. Equally, when it says the number of points that should be made, there is nowhere in the mark scheme that specifies a set number of points for these 20-mark essay questions. It doesn't say you should talk about, and unless the question itself for some reason says talk about 2, 3, 6, highly unlikely it'd be 6, then that is not stated anywhere. One very good response on one chain could access all the marks available. That's where we've got the depth going in rather than spreading it across lots and lots of different examples. That's not to say one is the best way. It will depend on the question. It will also depend on the student's ability and their knowledge. If they only know one particular answer and they're putting something else in for the sake of it and they're guessing, probably that's not the best way forward. They should maybe go into more depth on the one they do understand and try to really go to town on that with the full multi-stage chains of reasoning. If they know more than one, maybe it's safer to talk about 2, maybe 3. There's no hard rule about the number to talk about, but what we are looking for, as you can see from this analysis, this third bullet point here, clear, coherent, relevant and focused analysis. And then the key thing, the answer demonstrates logical and multi-stage chains of reasoning in terms of the cause and the consequence. So what leads to something else, which leads to something else. And remember, this is, it may happen, it could happen. It's not guaranteed to happen, perhaps. Understanding that will is not necessarily the best word to use. Could, should, may is usually a better understanding. It gives that idea that the student understands that better. But yeah, that multi-stage chain of reasoning is what we want. We want that depth of understanding for the chains of reasoning, rather than lots and lots of different points that aren't actually telling us why. So that's something quite critical to think about. But if it's only one that's given, and it's not done very well, then that's not going to meet the descriptor either. So it's finding the right balance of what the student can do and really remembering how much time is available. So practice, use the past papers, see every student will be different as well. So it's not as if you can have every student in your class doing exactly the same thing. Some will be better at doing things than others. So they need to practice to work on their best way to be able to answer the question. And as I say, every question is different. So it will depend on the depth that it can go into to answer that. No marks are ever deducted. So no, if somebody does more than is asked for in an explain question, they will not have marks deducted. Typically, they'll take the first response, but it depends on whether sometimes we get students that are hedging their bets and they might put 2 completely conflicting answers, in which case, like for example, in a calculate question, they might calculate elasticity and do it with the figures the opposite way around. Typically that will be 0 marks, because if you're just doing it in 2 different ways, and you clearly aren't showing that understanding, we can't reward that. In essay questions, students are penalising themselves if they write too much, which is detracting from the answer because they're losing time that they could be spending on another question. So, but we always positively mark. We don't take marks off for anything, but we do try to encourage students to put those chains of reasoning. That is really, really important that they do that. Okay, so that is the level descriptor for 20 marks for knowledge application and analysis. The evaluation works in the same way. It has its own descriptor table for a 20-mark essay question, and this is up to 8 marks out of the 20. So of course the remaining 8 of the 12 we've already looked at. It's a much smaller band. There's only 7 or 8 marks in the top level, which is level 3 for evaluation for 20-mark questions. But it still has 3 bullet points, 3 descriptors that we're looking for to achieve the top level for evaluate on 20-mark questions. So that is to evaluation recognises different viewpoints and/or is critical of the evidence, leading to an informed judgment. Appropriate reference to the evidence or context, and evaluation is supported by a logical chain of reasoning. Now, as I say, that will depend on the questioning as to how that will transpire, but it's not just a completely separate standalone statement that doesn't link back to the rest of the response. Equally, it should not just be a repeat of something that's put already. Ideally, it will be taking that something that has been argued and either developed to reach that conclusion, that final point to make a decision and justify why that is the case. So those are the descriptors for the top level in the evaluation table. Just see if there's anything else I want to just re-emphasize there. Yeah, just as I say, it's the same descriptor table that you will see for those 20-mark essay questions every series. It doesn't change. And so using these descriptor tables when you're teaching, and your students should be looking at them as well to identify what they need to do. They really should be looking at these descriptor tables in the mark scheme. There is indicative content, which does of course change per question because that depends on the question itself. But the key thing that is there every exam series is this descriptor table. So that's really important to look at. So here's an example of the indicative content in a 20-mark essay question. And we have the question itself: evaluate the view that rising consumer expenditure will always benefit an economy. So the mark scheme lays out about how the response can be credited, and it starts off, you can see it says there, knowledge application analysis, 12 marks, and it's got indicative content. So this is just an example of the sorts of things we might see in a response to this question, but it doesn't have to be there. Candidates could omit some of this and still reach full marks. They could put something different in as long as it's still accurate, and it would be a perfectly valid way of answering the question. So this is just an example of some of the sorts of things that they might say. So yes, we look at that as examiners and we do think, okay, have they done any of that? But we look at the response, and if it's answering the question effectively, then that will gain the merit regardless of whether it's in the indicative content or not. This is just as a guidance. So the question there again is shown at the top. And then we have the indicative content for the evaluation. So this, Selma, just might help you with your question there. So some of the sorts of things that we might see in the evaluation, ways that the candidate might put as a counter argument, an argument against the points they've already made. That, of course, it depends on the question, but it might be talking about pros and cons. It might be talking about the extent to which something might happen. It might be talking about how economic influences, for example, might limit how something happens, or the extent to which it happens. It might be talking about a whole host of different ways to evaluate, but it's the counter argument is the evaluation that we're looking for, leading then to, in that top level, as we say, that supported judgment. Just get too far there, sorry. So the exam paper itself, as we can see on the next slide. Good exam technique. Well, ensure that students practice using a whole paper and understand how it's laid out. So I've been saying that a few times as we've gone through this session. Those past papers are invaluable. Schemes of work to back up what needs to be taught, and the specification, that's the content, absolutely. But the exam papers, going through the mark schemes and practicing, doing it bit by bit initially, but then going on to do the whole thing to see how much time a student has, how much time they need on certain questions. That's really important to do that practice. Understanding there should be more than enough paper. This is a key thing. Some people write very big, some people don't. So the exam paper is there to try to cover those who do write bigger than others. So there should be more than enough. You shouldn't need to fill the whole booklet. It's not a case of write more, you'll get more marks. Unfortunately, sometimes that can detract from the answer. We do not negatively mark, we're not taking marks away, but it might lose the essence of what a student's trying to say. So they might go off track, and therefore their answer won't be as accurate maybe as it would have been if they just stuck to what they need to say. Equally, of course, it takes time away of writing more than you need to. So don't worry about filling the page up. That's something that's really important to tell your students. The timing, I've mentioned already, timing the tests, really, really useful to help them gauge what they need to do. And walking, talking mocks. So have a past paper, work just through some of it or through the whole thing, and talk through the responses for each individual question as you go. So maybe you want to dictate a response as you practice a paper, and the sorts of things that you'd be looking for, talking about, okay, how do we make sure we've got these chains of reasoning in there for the analysis aspect, make sure we've got the context in there, we're using the application of the extract, so we're not just putting standalone sentences in there. Some key ideas as to how to practice some of those. The timing that's suggested for each of these sections, so this is for units 1 and 2, we're talking roughly a minute per mark for the majority of it. So talking about for sections A and B anyway, minute per mark. But onto section C, allow a little bit more time to allow to be able to read the data in the source booklet and answer the questions. And the same on section D, a bit more time to have a read, have a think, but it will also allow that bit more time to review answers as they go through. So just an idea to practice, and again, break these down, do them in separate sections so that the candidate can have a think about what they're doing and see, am I spending too long, for example, on the section B side of it? There are only 4 marks, I've drawn my diagram. Am I putting too much time into that then I don't have enough time on the essays? So these are things to specifically have a look at. So those walking, talking mocks, just a little bit more detail there as to what we're talking about. So some things to have a think to make sure students are putting the right sort of things into their answer. So those are some suggestions how to apply the walking, talking mocks. So students sit in the same room where they're going to do the exam, get them familiar with the surroundings, get them familiar with where they're going to be sitting, and to have that silence and the feel of the exam room. But give them an exam paper as close to the real thing as you can, and then actually walk them through each question, how they're going to be doing it step by step to answer those particular questions. Then they can go on and write their answer in the time conditions. They do need to get used to that timing. So just a thought of an activity that you might want to use with these walking, talking mocks. It just gives you an idea for time, just sort of an indicator of, okay, you're getting close to the end of your time now. You really need to be wrapping it up. Have you finished? If not, stop where you are. And then that's something that individual students can practice to work on to try and speed things up in future. And then we're going to come on to look at the support. I'm doing this at a rate so we can hopefully go back and cover any of the questions that haven't been answered. We should still have enough time for doing that as we progress. So just to make sure everybody has the information they need from the slides. So the support available at every stage, you can see all the types of things that are available here, right from the getting started guide, the training events, all the way down through access to script services and Results Plus, which I'll talk in a little bit more detail, really useful resources that I will share with you momentarily. So you can see the planning, teaching and learning, the exam preparation, assessment and results support all have a whole host of different resources available to help you. So the teaching and learning materials online. So we've referred to the Pearson Edexcel website. So do use this website and there's new things on there every day. When you go on, you will see the course materials. You can download the specification, sample assessment materials, and then you can go on to, you see exam materials in the top right, and it shows 160, is that 180? Plenty of papers. That's the question papers, source booklets, mark schemes, principal examiner reports. So you can look at those for every series and for every unit to see what's gone before, to see how these question papers and mark schemes have remained consistent throughout, always using those same descriptor tables for the levels questions, and the assessment objectives and the way that those are applied to the mark scheme every series. Lots of other information, as I mentioned, the exemplars, how students are marked, and you can see at the bottom here, subject advisor. So I'm just going to be talking about him again in a moment as well. But yeah, get onto that website, and access to everything is on there. Plenty of things on there to help you. So Results Plus, this is support for exam preparation and post results. It's a tool teachers can often find useful in analysing students and your own teaching performance. So it gives you in-depth data on the performance of a candidate, the class, or a school in reference to the cohort. Teachers can use it to see which questions and specific points students have performed well or poorly in, and use it in their choice around revision, resits, and future classroom teaching. And just a little bit more detail on that. It is free. It's an online service to Pearson Edexcel centres that provides teachers and students with a depth insight into their exam performance. Results Plus was developed back in 2007 when Pearson Edexcel looked how it could modernise its exam marking process, and it brought over the ePen marking technology from the States. ePen is the marking tool used to mark responses. They're all scanned in and marked on that, and have been for almost 20 years. Students take their exam in the traditional paper-based way. Those papers are sent to a central processing centre and they're scanned, very big, very clever machines. Those electronic copies are then put onto ePen for examiners to mark wherever they may be, and they're marked digitally on the screen. That allows us to consolidate all that data, keep everything consistent, keep everything secure, and that information is then put into Results Plus, so we can see all that information that can be very helpful to your centre and your students. Another tool, Exam Wizard, this is where we can see where those topics have been mapped to the assessment objectives. So as I said, this happens for every paper, every series, and this goes into Exam Wizard, which is a free tool that teachers can use to produce exercises. They can produce mock papers, for example, based on the topic areas you've covered that you want to examine and test with your students. So there's a whole bank of questions on the particular topic areas, and they can be from multiple choice questions through to the essay questions. All the different topic areas are covered with these particular Exam Wizard topic areas going on to being mapped. So really helpful when you want to produce a test or have a look at possible questions or questions that have come up before, but they're all, as I say, individually broken down according to the topic areas. And then the access to scripts on the online portal, ATS. This is a self-service, online, free and instant tool from results day onwards. Provided you have permission from your students, you can access the data and look at the actual script that the student has taken, see how they have performed, what they've written, get the information to make a decision as to what happens next for that student. Sometimes they've missed a question entirely, sometimes they've written the wrong answer to the question, they've misread it perhaps. That is initially what might explain why they've not done as well as you thought they would, or it might be they've done better than you expected. Why is that? And again, you can see where they've got the marks for individual questions. So it's a way, it's specifically broken down to help them. There are additional resources that are paid for. Everything before, and we're talking about as free resources, but there are resources as well, such as student books with active books that can be paid for to assist with teaching and learning as well. So just a brief mention that they are available. Just a note there on the screen, I'm not going to go through all that in detail, but Pearson Publishing does support a modular approach for the different units in line with the latest specifications, which are indeed recognised worldwide as being comparable to UK universities and worldwide universities, and were reformed in line with the UK GCE A-levels as well. So just some information I'll leave on the screen for a moment for you. Before we come towards the end of these slides, and then I'll just make sure we go through any questions that haven't been answered in depth already. So the international on-screen assessment. So as you can see on this slide, Pearson's proud to be leading the way in on-screen assessment. So this is relatively new. It began a few years ago, 2022, with the International GCSE English language, and in 2023 International GCSE English Literature. Then this year we added some more international GCSE subjects, including GCSE Economics and the International A-Level English Lit and Language. And then next year we're adding some more international GCSEs to the on-screen assessment. So students, and you can see the results at the bottom, some of the positive things that have been said. Instead of taking the exam in the traditional way we're writing, they are available on screen for a small number of subjects at the moment, but that is going to be continually growing so that students can be more familiar, they're used to using computers, then it shows those exams can be available on screen for them. So it started as a pilot in 2020, but then the real thing in 2022. So just to make you aware of that if you weren't already. And there we go, that confirmation of those dates, just to show you 2022 where it kicked off. But we have plans for next year. They're already almost sorted now because we're getting close to those series, but they will continue to be added for other subjects as well. And subject advisor Colin Leaf. So these are the contact details you need after this point. I certainly can't get in touch with you individually, that's not permitted. You can't speak to any of the senior team because of course they are seeing live materials, so they're not allowed to liaise with you. But Colin does not see live papers, but he knows everything that's going on. So he is the subject advisor, he's there to answer any questions. So such as any specific topic area questions. There was something earlier, I think, about welfare loss, welfare gain, specific related topics like that. You want to speak to Colin and his team, you've got an email address, you've got a phone number. That is what you need to use to ask those specific questions, or anything indeed that you haven't had chance to ask today. If you think of something afterwards, make sure you've taken note of that. I will come back onto this slide in a moment, just want to finish the presentation. So any questions? I know there are some I haven't covered in the text chat. I'm going to go back through that now. Anything else, please put that in. Otherwise, thank you very much